I definitely agree. What's happened with technology in restaurants over a period of several decades is that we keep bolting technology onto the restaurant operation, and by and large the technology has gotten in the way of the relationship building that should happen between consumers and restaurants, right? But when they get in the way of that fundamental relationship, as they have for all this time, small sort of little bits of erosion here and there start to add up, and it's how you explain where we are now. But they're not doing restaurants the basic service of making sure they stay connected to their guests, which is sort of fundamentally the business that we see Blackbird being in.
This episode is sponsored by Safe, the account abstraction leader on Ethereum.
Hello, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Avery. How are you? You look like you're in a major different part of the world. Where are you?
Preparing for Cannes Lion, which we're super excited about. I actually am in Turkey right now. Just was at a wedding this weekend. Have to go to Cannes in a few days, so staying here for the interim. But it's so nice to see you. I'm super excited for this episode of Gen C. But you have a very special guest up your sleeve, don't you?
Yes, we have another session from Consensus, someone who has been on the show before, who we caught up with and had a just amazing conversation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But Avery, today was a very big day, and I know this airs on Mondays, so this will be slightly old news. But I wanted to ask you. I don't know if you knew, but AI actually stands for Apple Intelligence, according to
I
Tim
thought it was
Cook,
Allen Iverson.
and it is always Allen Iverson the answer. But in Apple's keynote, they just dropped that they're integrating a ton of AI into their systems through both a partnership with ChatGPT. They make so many of their own chipsets that already can do super high functioning machine learning. So they're also going to be doing a lot of kind of working within their own hardware ecosystem. I know nobody who actually likes Siri. So is this something that Apple just needed to do? What are your thoughts, Avery?
Okay, so here's my hot take is one, of course Apple needed to do this. Siri was like one of the first voice assistants, but it isn't used that much as it could be. Let's say that. I'm sure there are some people who are power users of Siri. Personally, I am not. I don't know anyone who is, but the idea of being able to talk to an AI chatbot like makes a lot of sense and has a beautiful visual design. I'll give them that. I think that this is something that Apple's probably been sitting on for quite some time. They didn't want to be behind in this, and I'm really excited to see what comes out next. And my hot take is that I actually think that Alexa by Amazon is going to get a major reboot soon because Amazon, many of our listeners will know Vayner was pretty early to the idea of voice assisted search. We actually had a voice con at one point. We had a lot of stuff in this direction of AI assisted voice search, and we were a little early to the game. Kind of a common theme with us. If I have to look in the mirror, we were a little early to this game, but I actually think it's all starting to materialize right now with this idea of being able to talk. Have a conversation with an AI chatbot who can then actually go and do things for you. Like for Amazon, you can actually order things. You can say you would like a liter of Pepsi sent to your house, etc. I think that's going to be pretty powerful. The thing that Apple also has is they have so much information on like who you're texting, what you're doing online, like all of these things. And I feel a lot better around their sort of privacy protections than I would about many of the other big tech companies. What do you think, Sam?
I think you hit it right at the park on that last one. They already in the keynote talked a lot about being privacy forward and that they're just much better than anybody else is in that game. So I think that
No
that's a
question.
super important point. I also think you're right. Alexa is going to be the last one standing, and we know Amazon has also invested billions in the last year in both acquisition as well as investment in different AI systems. So I think that also is one that I would look out. I mean, I keep wondering about something like Perplexity. I don't know if you've played with it that much,
Oh, I
but I
love
think like that
Perplexity.
could, yeah, and I think that could be an acquisition target for one of these big brands that's also trying to do this. The other thing I think, which is interesting, is Apple does have so many different devices that and I know we talked about this a few weeks ago, but like all of this is truly like the death knell to the humane and rabbit, like these peripheral devices today, because with ChatGPT and now with what Apple's doing, it's just going to be, those features will be built into your devices. And I just think the idea of replacing the phone is just one that we're still too far away from to need another device. Someone at the dinner we had in Consensus that you're at as well, Harold, had an AI pin, a humane pin on. I don't know if you got to play with it. And even he was talking about how like he's been wearing this thing for an hour and it's like it's heating up and like like burning his chest while he's doing it. And I was like this is just not a form factor we need today. So I just wonder if the peripheral AI device is going to like go the way of some other devices.
Absolutely. It's like what we talked about with Shahar and the glasses, right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't want to add another thing. It's like I'm already wearing sunglasses, so that makes sense. I might already have my phone, so that makes sense. I don't need to add another thing.
Yeah.
Although people said that about the Apple Watch, and clearly that has been incredibly successful. So I'm not counting it out, but like you would wear a watch. So I think that's sort of the trick there. And yes, I did
Yes.
notice he was wearing the humane pin, and I actually think he guessed the price of Bitcoin on a very precise day. And I was like, how did he do that?
Yes, he did.
And that's how.
I did say without using your phones, and he used the humane pen. So I don't know if that was a technicality I should have called him out on, but we did ask him for a specific date, the price of Bitcoin. I think also what's interesting is they make this announcement, at least at the time now, we'll see when the pod comes out, but Apple's stock price was down about 1%. And it made me also wonder if the market was actually wanting more than they
Mhm.
gave, which I think is often a critique of Apple, that they don't take
Yeah.
big enough swings. So that could have been something where they were expecting a truly groundbreaking use of AI, and this may be just more like bringing them up to level at present.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see as more and more big tech jumps into the AI world. I keep thinking about the conversation we had last week, and that I've had over the last couple of weeks of just how much we're slightly replicating the big issues of big tech now, but with just a new interface with AI versus like how do we push humanity forward a little bit more is
Yep.
still feel like it's something that's still hard to find in some of the ways people are talking about it. It still just feels like monetization and information at scale.
Yeah, I love that you called out Perplexity because I think that that's one that doesn't get enough love, and we use Perplexity all the time. And what I love about it is that it also sources, which just
Yeah.
inherently makes me feel better that you can go and vet, where did you find out this information? And they do it in a really nice interface. So let's go Perplexity. Sam, shifting gears here though, one of our friends had a very exciting company, Crypto the Game, that I believe was just acquired. What's on your mind for that one?
Yes, Dylan Abrascato. We'll get him on to come on the pod at some point. He was also, I don't know if you remember, Avery, you are probably, I don't know if our audience will remember. For about a minute in the late 2000 teens, there was like this huge viral sensation called HQ Trivia, which was like this online moment where you'd have a talking head. It would be on an app. You had to guess and you could win money by basically being the final answer in a trivia contest that like people were just playing around the country. And it was like one of the examples of like social gamification that happened very quickly and then it went away really quickly as well. And Dylan was part of the team behind that. So he really knows like virality in social memes. And so Crypto the Game, which has had 2 seasons, I played the last season, which in essence is a survivor style game. The first one was about 400 players. The last game was about 800 players. And it's a winner take all. So the last, winner, I think, got $250,000 of the equivalent. And so,
NBD.
but what happens is it's all like puzzle based. There's a lot of like twists and turns that happen within the game itself, and most of it takes place on social media. So it's really a crypto Twitter forward game, I would say, more than anything else. And yeah, Uniswap Labs came in and said we want you, and acquired them. The whole team is going over there, and I think which is actually a great play for Uniswap because I think Uniswap is really today thought of as like a one function service, right? Where I'm swapping this coin for that coin. And I think the idea
Yes.
is that Uniswap can be a little bit more of a platform. And so I think that Hayden, who runs Uniswap, is a very, very, very smart guy and probably saw that the virality and the opportunity for like positive sentiment and getting people engaged within the system. And then frankly, Uniswap has its token and all the other things that could be used for rewards. I think there's a big play here. Just definitely a shout out to Dylan, but also the idea of just social gamification. If you talk to Dylan, he'll be the first to tell you his game is not really about crypto. Like the prizes in crypto and the tokens are NFTs, but really everything else is just gameplay.
Yeah, I love it.
Did you play any of the seasons, Avery?
I did the first one, and I was like, wait, I don't have enough time or money to put into this right now, but I wanted to support. And I think that right now, sort of acquisition season, acqui-hire season, however you want to frame it, World of Women actually just joined the Tezos family, which is not one that I saw coming. Did you see
Yeah.
that, Sam? And what do you think?
Yeah, I ran into Chelsea, who is part of the World of Women team in Consensus, and she kind of gave me the heads up. She was like, don't tell anyone. But I thought it was an interesting play. I have not gone deep enough into it. So like, I don't know if it's like they're cross-chain, like in terms of the assets, or if they're just going to be building like their community on Tezos. I collect a lot of Tezos NFTs. I have a big store of them. Some people love the Tezos chain. It's very cheap and like green chain. Some people are kind of like,
Exactly.
it's not decentralized
International.
enough. So there's a lot of challenges around Tezos, but I used to know a lot of the team there who were all very good, smart, creative people. So I think it's like a good play. I think the big challenge, which I think we all know, is what really is the longer form opportunity for these PFP projects. Because I think
Right.
that World of Women now, where at one point was commanding 10 ETH, $30,000 for a token to be part of the community, all of that stuff has really bottomed out. And so I think you still have vibrant communities, but without that sort of raining dollars on people, I think a lot of them are finding it challenging to find their footing. And so I think that's where I wonder if something like this is a longer term play of like, how do we get in bed with an ecosystem, really try and spend time developing a community plan with someone who is forward thinking and like wants to bring us along on the journey. What are your thoughts?
For one, I thought it was cool because Tezos is actually founded by a female team, which I thought was like a nice little tie-in to World of Women.
Mhm.
I would have, I guess I sort of knew that some of these female-focused communities might like join forces. We saw that with Hug and with BFF and with Boss Beauties, etc. So I was like, okay, what's going to happen with WoW, which was always the sort of most premium, most premier of those. I think Yam's a really talented artist. Their operating team, like Shannon's awesome. And I think that, to your point, like they have been struggling to find like, what is that business model? What is that sort of fit beyond sort of art and just community. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this from these. I mean, we've seen obviously all the Yuga acquisitions, and I think we'll continue to see that. On the flip side, we have projects like Doodles that have sort of invested in building other lines of business, like their animation studio acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. And some of them, believe it or not, continue to raise money, Sam.
I don't doubt it. I think people are still trying, and I think as the conversation we're about to play will show, there are a lot of people who take a very long view on where this ecosystem is going to go. They really believe in the power of both blockchain and these chains to help solve a lot of challenges, not just financial. And so I think the idea that, whether we look at like, oh, NFTs were hot in 2022 and they're not so hot in 2024, I think that's actually taking too short-term a view on the opportunity here. There are many movements that take decades, right? And we don't know if this one will, but I think we have to give the possibility that this might take a while. With that, Avery, let's get to our conversation. So this one was recorded at Consensus, which was a conversation between myself and Ben Leventhal from Blackbird. We had him on a while ago. I think Ben is one of the sort of most connected people in the restaurant game. He really understands building consumer tech. He's the first one to say that blockchain is not consumer grade, but he has been building a lot on what he's doing with Blackbird. They just opened, I believe, San Francisco as their next market. I know they're in LA, they're in New York. And they also just launched a coffee program, which I did buy an NFT for, which basically says you can get free coffee for a year if you have the NFT. So it was $75. I'm about to be drowned in coffee, Avery. It's going to be the most
I love
caffeinated
it.
you've ever seen me.
I
So
can't wait for it.
after the break, we'll be right back with my conversation with Ben Leventhal. We'll see you in a minute. Safe is enabling ownership for all with smart accounts. With over $100 billion in total value stored across over 14 networks, Safe accounts are embedded everywhere, including DeFi Saver, WorldCoin, Dracula app, and more. Build and use the most battle-tested smart account in Ethereum. Visit safe.global. All right, well, welcome to the final session of the day. Thank you all for spending time with us. It's been a wonderful day, learning from so many interesting folks on the idea of digital assets, collectibles, all the ways business is transforming. I'm very happy to have Ben Leventhal with us. Ben will give his backstory, but I wanted to end the day with Ben because I feel like, when we spoke, I think it was a year ago, Ben, I think, was gave me a lot of things to think about in relation to how people should think about actually building businesses on technology. Ben's built a number of them. And that conversation has been resonating in my mind over and over for many years. So I thought, since we spoke last year, and I thought there were so many nuggets in there that we should really digest for the audience here. So first of all, Ben, I would love for you just to give your 2-minute backstory, what you've done, and then we'll get into Blackbird after that.
For sure. So, first of all, excited to be here. Appreciate you guys having me. The really quick story is I've been obsessed with restaurants my whole life, and somehow I figured out how to create a career around that obsession. So I founded Eater.com in the early aughts, and more recently I founded a company called Resy, which runs reservation software for restaurants around the country and around the world. And most recently, I've founded Blackbird, which is focusing on loyalty, membership benefits, and payments for the restaurant industry on crypto rails. And I was born and raised in New York.
Born and raised in New York, as was I. I wanted to understand some insights. You've built things that have scaled really well with technology. And I think that in many ways, crypto has done a good job at that. And in many ways, it's done a terrible job, especially on the UX layer. But are there insights that you think about in terms of how do we scale technology with the user in mind? Because I think right now, we're a little too focused on scaling it with technology in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is that users expect their products to be magical relative to what existed before. And I think that there's nothing more important than understanding that as a builder. You know, you have to be very honest with yourself about your product. Is it delivering magic? And it's not magic in an absolute sense. It's relative to everything that there was before, you know? So I think it's really kind of fascinating to see how we, as we're watching all this AI chat GPT develop, you know, none of it's quite magical yet, but it definitely is relative to what we had before it. So I think, you know, that's certainly the key thing that we keep in mind.
So when we think of that in relation to what you're doing with Blackbird, in some respects, Resy did its job too well, right? It created, has anyone here reserved a table on Resy? All right, a couple of people, right? So what that did was it abstracted away the relationship to some degree between the restaurant and the consumer.
Yeah.
You weren't the only ones doing it, but you guys were a pretty successful version of that. With Blackbird, it feels like you're reversing that. You're like, let's create this relationship again, and let's get everyone from A16Z and Amex to be a part of that, which I also assume they love that story too. So yeah, can you tell us about the difference of a Resy model and a Blackbird model?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, looking at the opportunity broadly, obviously, just to sort of set the stage, restaurants are a $1 trillion industry in the U.S. alone. It's a humongous industry, and it's made up of tiny players, mostly independent restaurants. When we think as individuals about the restaurants we love, they tend to be the indies. There's a couple of brands that have captured our imagination, but by and large, when we've looked forward to going out to eat, those are independent restaurants. So we love them, but they have no leverage, and they're tiny, and they're mostly subscale as businesses. So I find that, you know, kind of generally to be fascinating. I think in terms of your observation about how Resy functions versus the way Blackbird might, I definitely agree. What's happened with technology in restaurants over a period of several decades is that we keep bolting technology onto the restaurant operation, and by and large, the technology has gotten in the way of the relationship building that should happen between consumers and restaurants, right? So all these services, and I would start all the way back at credit cards, all of these things are, of course, incredibly compelling, important technologies, but when they get in the way of that fundamental relationship, as they have for all this time, small sort of little bits of erosion here and there start to add up, and it's how you explain where we are now, which is to say that most restaurants don't really have a good sense of who their customers are, don't have a good sense of how to stay connected to them and get them coming back and turning them into repeat customers with high LTV. And so their restaurants are kind of at the mercy of all of these technology companies. And I think, you know, many of them behave in mostly benevolent ways, and they're not trying to be particularly unhelpful or they're not trying to create contentious relationships with their restaurant partners, but they're not doing restaurants the basic service of making sure they stay connected to their guests, which is sort of fundamentally the business that we see Blackbird being in.
Could we make the argument, and this is not a problem you created, but could we make the argument that technology has also not only added that barrier between the relationship, but also in the idea of monetization has also increased the cost to the consumer? I was thinking the other day, a local restaurant, I didn't have their menu. I went to like Grubhub, and I looked and I was like, I can't believe it's $27 for guacamole. And then I went to their website and I saw that it was $17. And it was just the difference of what they had on the Grubhub or whatever the app was, and I assume was just to really cover the fact that they're being gouged on fees.
Yes, I mean, in the end, restaurants are not particularly profitable. There's not that many ways to make money delivering technology to restaurants. You can either be a SaaS provider, in which case you're charging restaurants a couple of $100 a month, maybe, SaaS flat fee, or you can get in the flow of transactions, and then either you're charging the restaurant or the consumer, or sometimes both. And definitely, I mean, when you look at delivery and the big delivery players, certainly I think that they're single-handedly responsible for $17 pad thai becoming 35.
Right. I want to move to the idea about building a brand, a Web3 forward brand with an audience that largely is not doing the work that many of the people here would do, right? So the fact that you released a white paper, fly paper, the fact that you had minting your relationship, if you will, to the restaurant itself, those seem like intentional choices to not hide the fact of what you were doing. And was that the idea of, I want to use this as a way to onboard this audience? Or was that, let's just make sure we're talking crypto because there's also a lot of investors and fanatic people in the crypto industry?
I mean, in the end, we're here because we strongly believe in the technology and what it can deliver in terms of that magic that I mentioned in the long run. I mean, I think when you're building large-scale consumer products, especially using crypto and blockchain technologies, you do have to be careful. I mean, I think we have to be more focused on the magic and less focused on the crypto, probably, for the rest of time. And I think we'll all get more comfortable with some of the stuff that we're also excited about here, sort of falling into the background and being infrastructure and not product. But I mean, I think we are introducing crypto into the product at exactly the pace we think it makes sense from a user benefit standpoint. I think NFTs as a connectivity tool for restaurants and guests make a ton of sense and are scalable for us right out of the gate. We're about to introduce a bunch of stuff around payments, and you're going to start to see us use the blockchain to move value from consumers to restaurants and do so at very low cost. And I think, again, it made sense to us to start to do that now. So, I think the pace at which we introduce crypto, talk about crypto, it'll just it'll be what we think makes sense.
Yeah, because when we talked last, you're very definitive that to build a brand, we should actually stop talking about crypto.
Yeah.
And we should really be talking about consumer technology.
Yeah. And
I think you guys have been very intentional. There's a couple of folks that have done that. How does that conversation go when you're talking to the restaurant and trying to onboard them? Are they worried?
I think that, I mean, crypto and restaurants, so some of it is relief, because I think restaurants that are paying attention have a sort of, in the back of their mind, like there's something that's telling them, I need to sort of do something with crypto. So when Blackbird comes in and comes knocking and says, yeah, we're on chain, it's sort of relief. Like, okay, great, you guys will figure this out for me, which is the way it should be. But I think there's still, by and large, restaurants it's not crypto's not even in the conversation. We're going into a restaurant and saying, here's a couple problems you all have. Loyalty is something that you need to focus on. Retention is something you need to focus on. All of the large-scale operators in the space are focusing on loyalty and retention. So you're definitionally battling them for your customers. So I think the conversation with restaurants is much more about how can we deliver some value against some very pressing problems. There is a subset of the market that's crypto forward, crypto savvy, and they're just sort of happy that we're thinking it through for them.
So they're happy you're thinking through it for them. Are they also, I mean, they're not taking themselves off other listing services or whatever, but going back to the data opportunity, part of the promise is that they get some more insights. So can you talk a little bit about how, what does a restaurant get, but also what does the network of restaurants get once people start using Blackbird more and more?
I think one of the things that's going to emerge as people start to, sort of get more of a handle on what we're doing. I think one of the things that's going to emerge about how we're using the blockchain is, I hope that people think we're using it in terms of identity in a very interesting and thoughtful way. So when a consumer checks into a restaurant, let's take a half step back. the sort of atomic gesture of activity on Blackbird so far is a check-in, right? So as a consumer, you walk into the restaurant, you tap one of our NFC chips, and that's a digital handshake with the restaurant. We give them information about you in real time. So we're delivering a couple of things. We're delivering obviously some PII, first name, last name, email, phone number, your home zip code, things like that. We're delivering that from our servers securely to them, and adhering to whatever local regulations exist around PII. The next thing we're delivering, and this is on chain, is your sort of dining footprint. All of the places you've been, all the places you've checked in. So as opposed to all of the other services out there, the restaurant, the second you walk in, sees your profile of restaurants that you like, right? The third thing we're delivering to them is what we've developed as a guest value score. So we've taken your dining behavior, what we can infer about your spending behavior, what we can infer about a lot of things, and we're saying to the restaurant in very simple kind of productized terms, do we think this is a potential high value customer? And that's something that we sort of think about on a long-term basis is really interesting for us and proprietary, and something I think we're going to do very well, and hopefully can give that to the industry in certain ways. But this is if we take this in and of itself is a huge question and opportunity. When you walk through the door, the restaurant has to wrap their heads around: is this a potential high value customer or not? Right? So that's the third thing, and the fourth thing, and this is something that we're going to start putting some meat around in the coming weeks and months, is we're giving them essentially data about the amount of fly, the amount of points, and the sort of your spending power on the platform. So you're going to have this as a restaurant. The second somebody walks in, you're going to have these four categories of really, really important information, and I think that's going to sort of form a pretty high fidelity view of every customer. Not something that restaurants today develop over a period of time. You might develop that over 20 visits with a customer. With Blackbird, you get that the first time they walk through the door.
So earlier on this day, we had Erica from Adidas was talking. And one of the things that Adidas did when they launched their NFT, which I thought was brilliant, was they gave an early mint access to the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And at the time, the Bored Ape Yacht Club was one of the most valuable NFTs out there, so they knew these people had some money. I mean, I guess I think about it where you're just saying you're working on opening San Francisco as the next market. Someone could say, this is a high-value person in New York. They're coming to San Francisco. Now, when they get in, maybe that the restaurant now knows, right?
100%.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And that becomes, but is that sort of a transparent data opportunity, or is that Ben just represents someone who looks like, I guess, how do you think about in essence, interoperability for restaurants for us as users?
If I understand the question, I mean, I think we feel like our job, Blackbird's job, is to make the data real and actionable and essentially product, and not raw data, not something that's ambiguous, not something for the restaurant to sort of try to parse through. So, when I talk about these things, we're thinking about how do we put that into a product, how do we make that a button or a specific tag or something, with one tap that's actionable. But I think generally we feel like the way we're looking at the sort of data set and the way we're thinking about putting it together, that's very real and it's very real time.
And is there any plans, or you may have something, let me think about this. We're in Austin. Whenever I come to Austin, someone says, what's your favorite barbecue restaurant? I always tell them on the east side, Le Barbecue is the place you want to go. Don't wait in line at other folks. But now I go to Le Barbecue, and now the line's long, right? But I think about when I first used to go, and there's nobody there. Is there a day one opportunity for folks who are discovering restaurants and also being vocal and making the recommendations that earn them some way that in the future these restaurants know these people were here for me? And partly because when we talked last, you mentioned being early into a restaurant is emotional, right? For both the restaurant and the consumer, someone, they're a regular.
Yeah.
How do you replicate that in the tech world?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is muscle memory that the restaurant industry has to develop. So I think a lot of people see this, and it's a clear opportunity, and I totally agree with it. But I think it's not exactly natural for the restaurant to start to think about, basically you're talking about access, right, and
Yeah.
VIP treatment. And it's not super natural for restaurants to sort of to cede control of VIPs and VIP handling to technology. And in fact, with Resy as an example, we gave restaurants all kinds of tools to say, look, we'll sort out the VIP thing for you. You guys go about your business. And no restaurant on the planet would relinquish control of that.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that this is going to take some time. And I think the more we deliver that information about consumers and the more what we say kind of proves out to be the case, the more trust we're going to have with the industry to do these kinds of things. But I think generally, we strongly believe that we're building technology in the service of hospitality and in the service of the best professionals out there. So we're going to think about how is that joint operating? We're going to think about like how do they think about VIPs today? What are the kind of behaviors that they're rewarding and how? And we're going to kind of reverse engineer that into product over time.
That's great. I want to turn to the crypto market in a couple of questions. As an entrepreneur, my guess is if it was, hey, Ben Leventhal is launching a new restaurant play, with the success and the track record you've had, I can imagine people would line up to want to be involved. When you first got funded with Blackbird, I assume, especially the fact that you're building on chain, there was a lot of people who were interested in coming in. In that time that you then got funded, we went into a pretty deep bear market. And I guess as an entrepreneur, what was it like building a crypto forward, Web3 forward brand in a moment when maybe the sentiment, especially post FTX and all of that, might have been much more negative? Like, would it have been easier just to go traditional Web 2? And why did you stick with it?
I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, in the early stages of building a business, it can always kind of feel like winter, day in and day out. It's a grindy endeavor. I've made the analogy recently. We're like a teething baby right now. There's days where it feels like we got a good night's sleep, and there's days when everything doesn't sort of nothing seems to be clicking. But I think as it relates to the crypto winter, when I was at Amex, I was at Amex at the start of COVID, and the CEO of Amex, Steve Squeri, who I think is one of the great leaders in corporate America, he said something to us which has always kind of resonated with me, which is, you gotta take the downturns and the bear markets to prepare to accelerate out. Bear markets and downturns and winter is for getting ready. So, I think, and now obviously, things are kind of starting to feel frothy. It feels like we're kind of on the other side of all that. And so I think the most we can do, that the thing that is incumbent upon us as a startup is to be ready to accelerate out. And to have taken advantage of the downturn where, let's be honest, like there's no pressure. Quarterly results in a downturn, there's not as much pressure. When the markets are cranking, you got to crank alongside them. So I think that's the thing to keep in mind. And I think where we try to focus is just on, are we getting ourselves ready now for these markets to run, and are we going to be in a position to run with them? And I think I think our team has done a great job of getting us ready.
So there was never a moment in the bearish of the bear, when Bitcoin was in the 30s or 18 or whatever it was, where you said, maybe I'll just pivot this?
No, never, not one moment. I mean, I think, so two things. One is because we have a very long-term view on what crypto is going to deliver. And I think the companies that got into some trouble are companies that were playing a slightly shorter game than it turned out they should be playing. But also, I have to give a lot of credit to Fred Wilson, who is on our board and one of the the all-time greats. He was very, very deliberate with us at the start to say, look, the because we had we talked about valuation. They co-led our seed round, and he was very deliberate and insistent with me and with the business around valuation, around thinking on a longer term basis. So I think we got lucky. We had the right people around us, and we were thinking on a long term basis.
Just to follow up on that, when you say we're pretty bullish on our long-term opinion of crypto, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we all do, I think we believe that crypto is going to be some of the fundamental infrastructure of the future world. I mean, I think the potential of the technologies that we're looking at and that we're building with right now are incredible. But they're not consumer grade yet, so
Right.
we have to take the time to get them there.
Right. So a question that I ask, we speak to a lot of brands, right? A question that I ask a lot of them is, how do you manage the realities of crypto Twitter? We have, folks who identify as degen, and all they want to see is that their prices go up, that the brands that they're involved with are making them money,
Yeah.
that they're getting an airdrop, that they're
Yeah.
doing something. Now, Blackbird, I think, was very well designed to not play in those terms. But I've had multiple brands say to me that we don't want the degen audience. Crypto Twitter is toxic. All day long just wanting us to increase value and value and value is not how we can build a long-term brand. And I guess, do you see, or again, maybe in the design of how you did it, do you see the degen audience as one that you embrace? Is it not really aware of Blackbird? Are they not looking for their fly to become more valuable? How do you approach
I mean,
a very
we love
vocal
our
set of people?
degens. We love our degens. I mean, we have a couple on our team, and they are, the heart and soul of what we're doing. But they're like a bunch of Rottweilers in a pit sometimes. Like they just are just going nuts, and we're trying to sort of corral them in a way. And I think sometimes we're successful, and sometimes we're not. But we are learning from them, which is important. And obviously, in the early days, they are, in some ways, kind of a tailwind to what we're doing. So, I mean, I think ultimately, the degens are a big part of our success. And I think it would be foolish for companies to discount the power of them or to be dismissive. But, they, as you said, some of our goals and some of our priorities are misaligned with the sort of hardcore degen priorities, and so we have to find ways of either being okay with the misalignment or kind of help throttling them back a little bit, or just kind of coexisting. I would say we're kind of working this through in real time right now. We had a bunch of early users of Blackbird who, went out, and of course you'd expect this behavior, started farming fly, started getting as many points as they possibly could with the expectation that those points would turn into a valuable token. And we saw crazy behaviors. We saw people with 10 phones walking into a restaurant, like 6 pockets, different phones,
Right.
tapping in. And we saw people paying people to tap in. We saw a kind of gray market develop for trading of tokens. And I said we saw. I'm sure that it probably still exists. But and so we had to shut a lot of that down. But we learned a lot through those behaviors about what we needed to do to essentially harden the platform, both kind of from a technology perspective, but also just from a kind of business policy standpoint. And we certainly appreciate that enthusiasm. So we're now, as we speak, taking steps to essentially reinstate a lot of those early users who, definitely went way too far. And most of them, I think, if you really ask them, would say, okay, we probably,
Right.
we abused the system a little bit. But now we're getting them back onto the platform. We're aligning on what's allowed and what's not allowed and what we need them to do. And I hope they're going to be, humongously valuable to the community. But yeah, I mean, we love the degens.
All right, two more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. The first is, for folks out here who are building brands, I mean, I always say the people I think are doing it right, who are thinking big, are you guys. I love what Nike's been doing. I think they're really intentional about what they build. So are there others in the space that you think are also doing a good job on this building a brand level? Who do you look at and say, like, I see that what they're doing has the thought process and intention. Who do you like in the crypto space?
Totally. I mean, obviously our partner Base, no small player there, obviously, but I think Base has a great perspective on how to build to the future. I think Jesse's an incredible builder and leader there. Our partners at Privy, I think, have an incredibly strong and cogent view of how identity should work. I'm sorry he couldn't make it, but I think what the Pudgy guys are doing is awesome. So yeah, I think there's some really good stuff out there.
Yeah. For everyone who was hoping to see Luca Netz,
I'm sorry.
He did get sick yesterday and could not make it. We were going to have a 3-person conversation. And I guess just final, you've now been building this for a little while. You have a great team. You're making headway in this. Is there advice for someone starting today who wants to build and think about how to build a Web3 forward brand, but make it at the scale of what Eater or Resy or what Blackbird is going to be?
I think as with anything crypto or otherwise, I think first of all you got to understand how stiff the competition is. I mean, the bar on technology products today is as high as it's ever been, and it's getting higher like by the second. So I mean, you got to really come with something outstanding. I think you got to know what your lane is. You got to know, as I like to say, like you got to understand what your superpowers are. And if you don't know what your superpowers are going in, that's a good moment to pause and figure out what they are. And I think in terms of the crypto piece, let's just be realistic. Let's just understand the future is extraordinarily bright, but the present is a little choppy, and this stuff is not consumer grade. And if we try to force feed it to people, it's not going to work. So let's build towards where we want to get to, but do it in a deliberate and thoughtful and kind of gentle way.
So quickly, just following up, what was your superpower?
Well, I really know restaurants.
Yeah.
Somehow I've really figured them out, and I think brand development, storytelling, I think is where we can really shine.
All right, Ben, thank you for spending some time with us.
Sure.
Thank you guys for attending. We'll see you tomorrow back here at the Gen Z stage.